Guten Abend, ein herzliches guten Abend an unsere Gäste hier in
Good
Brüssel.
evening to all our guests here in Brussels, and an especially warm welcome to you all who participate in Berlin and in other parts of the world. We're here in the beautiful building of the Berlin Senate, of the Berlin representation in Brussels, in order to discuss on the future of Europe, and on the question what this can bring for the social dimension of Europe. I'm very glad that you all participate. And before we start, I'd like to point out that via Slido, you can participate, you can put questions to us on slido.com, hashtag 476907. And there you can easily scan the QR code and then send us your questions, which will then be submitted to me, and our guests here can try to answer your questions. And we have interpretation, English, German at today's meeting. And another thing I would like to say at the beginning, there is a conference charter that had been adopted by the Conference on the Future of Europe. And the Senate of Berlin is committed to this charter. And in this framework, you have to see our today's meeting. And this Charter of Europe is a relatively old idea, but was started in the May of this year. This conference on the future of Europe. It's called conference, but it's actually more, and we're going to talk about exactly this. And we have two panel members. We have our host tonight, Gary Whoop, here to my right, from the Senate Department of Culture and Europe of the state of Berlin. Mr. Whoop is originally from Saxony, but then moved to Brandenburg. And already 4 or 5 years ago, he took over the field of Europe in his work. He has experience in many areas, also in the Federal Republic, i.e. from all the 3 levels. And you can also say, what is the contribution of Berlin to this conference of the future and why Berlin participates? And then here I have Helmut Scholz to my left, member of the European Parliament, who has a degree from Moscow and was then a diplomat in China. But after that, he moved over quickly to the European Parliament, where he has been for 10 years now. He is on various committees, on the Constitutional Committee, for example, and we're going to tell you later why that committee is so important. And then we have an empty chair here next to me, which is about to be filled. And this means that I can now say thank you very much to you, because you're not Tanja Bergmarath, whom we expected according to our program, but she has a cold. And that's why on short notice, Isabel Schumann came here to replace Tanja Bergmarath. You are in the Federal Board of the European Trade Union Confederation of the ETUC. I know that your German is perfect, even though you're French, so we don't need French in our today's meeting. And the question we're going to put to you is clearly what about the trade unions, what are they going to do about this future of Europe? Let's talk about the conference on this future of Europe, which has in its focus the citizens, i.e. you all who are listening now, and many levels participate at the moment in events, in discussions, and everybody should have the possibility to participate in meetings like the meeting we have here today. My first question is to you, Gary Whoop. What about Berlin? Why do you participate? Why is this conference on the future of Europe so important for Berlin? Well, Berlin is a European metropolis, so we have a historic responsibility. And the challenges which the countries have and the citizens have are such that they can only be mastered jointly. So reform and renewal of the European Union, that's what it's all about. I'm in the Committee of the Regions for Berlin, and in the committee we discussed this morning and mentioned how important it is that the local communities, as a representation of the citizens, motivate the citizens to participate in these discussions. We create such platforms with pleasures, and we also supported civil society organizations in Berlin, also a network via which we can have a structured dialogue, structured discussions, and can produce results and proposals. And today we are setting up a new platform, and that's why I'm happy that today we have a representative of the trade unions of the ETUC. I think it's fantastic that we also have this European dimension now. And also from Berlin, we wanted to concentrate on the European Union, on the social pillar, on the European dimension. And the question is now, how can we take all this further? How can we continue with the discussions? That's the basic setting for all this. And we also have the digital platform on which we are going to publish the results of our discussions. Well, thank you very much. We've heard quite a lot. Future of Europe, conference on the future, social dimension, social pillar. Let's start with a conference on the future. We have a representative of the European Parliament here, and at the outset, I said that the citizens should be taken on with you all on this journey. But you're a parliamentarian, don't you just represent all the citizens? Well, the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, after the European elections, in her inaugural speech in the European Parliament, said that the success or the result of the European elections have not yet been really implemented in the structures, in the in the way the institutions of the EU are shaped, so that we have to consider jointly how in the future we can shape up this European Union in order to represent the whole of the Union. And she said the citizens have to participate in this process. That was her message to the parliament. And that was about a year and a half or nearly 2 years ago. And now we have reached a point at which we have taken up the actual work. And the first really active part of this future conference are the so-called citizens panels, i.e. discussion rounds of each time 200 randomly selected citizens with different origins, from different regions, from urban settings, from rural settings, and so on and so forth. We, the European Parliament, said right from the start that we want to guarantee gender equality, gender parity, and these discussions have already started. And the next weekend there will be the first phase of the first citizens panel will be concluded. So the issues which are discussed there are, for example, things mentioned on the digital platform. And we group them, and citizens can participate. And one of the most important topic blocks is a strong economy and social justice at the workplace, exactly the topic for us tonight. And that's why we, as representatives of the parliament, said, well, we consider ourselves as the representatives, elected representatives, but we also think that we need interactivity, a constant interchange with the citizens. The citizens, you said, well, we also have organizations who represent the citizens. For example, the ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation, Ms. Schönbaum. So what about the social dimension in this future conference? Have the trade unions really been able to impose this topic? And do the trade unions need this conference on the future in order to make progress here? Well, we have really fought hard to be part of these discussions. We also have the voice of the workers in these discussions, and as an important voice, this is very important to us, so that we contribute to shaping this future, which we want to be more social, more green, because for this should be discussions which bring about something positive for everybody. That was our concern in these discussions. That's why we wanted to participate in these discussions. We wanted to be in the committees in which decisions are taken, in which it is decided which topics will be discussed. We would say, let's say more concretely what the topics are. You as a European Trade Union Confederation, you might say, well, we want to have the social dimension. Yes, that is true. I mean, concretely, we want a social progress clause. We want that this conference, as a result, brings about a change of the treaty, so that in the treaty we have social progress enshrined in the treaty, which is a counterbalance to the economic freedoms, so that the rights, the workers' rights are also at the same level or even at a higher level than the economic freedoms. Well, if I'm from Berlin and I look at this transition and I hear social dimension, what are the topics which are important for the citizens of Berlin in this respect? And what would you say, which are the three most important topics for you to be discussed, which should be brought forward in these discussions? Well, one thing that Ms. Schönbaum already mentioned is the progress clause, which we also back up. We have public contracts which we give to companies, and the judgment we had in Berlin was a problem for us in Berlin, because at the regional level we had arranged things, and the question is, what about these freedoms? Can there be so many freedoms if we have them at the moment, or should they be at the same level as the social rights? That's why we need a better basis, even also at the European Union, for these issues. And then the reinsurance for unemployment. This is unfortunately a complicated process, but the experiences from the pandemic show that now we have been able to find a solution which helped hundreds of thousands of people through the pandemic via better social conditions. And that's why we think that this instrument should be carried on in the future. Well, I think we have a lot of English-speaking participants here. English-speaking participants may listen to us on their computer, and I think they say, well, sounds well. It's an instrument which the European Union set up to finance a short-time work during COVID. That could be a first step to such an unemployment reinsurance. But what about the social dimension? What about the treaty amendments? Mr. Scholz from the European Parliament, you are the ones who decide in Europe. Cannot you? Why can't you just decide that we introduce the social dimension? Well, this is the core problem or the core challenge of this whole conference on the future. The question is, why do we need it? For the first time in the last 20 years, we have a possibility to discuss, but this is not really a decision panel. We are representatives who are elected, but only to a certain degree can we contribute. There is a contradiction. We have an economic and monetary union. We have a single market. We have rules, laws enshrined in the treaties on the structure and on the functioning of this single market. But the social dimension, all the questions of pay for work, reinsurance, questions of health are left on the national level. Decisions are taken at the national level. And the challenge, the way I see it, is that I think everybody, all the people who are listening to us in Berlin, should participate in this conference, should contribute to overcome this contradiction. So we can, as a final demand of this conference, ask for an amendment of the treaty. I'm from the left, which I can say openly here, and we think that we need a social union to counterbalance the economic union. We need the social protocol in primary law in the treaties so that it becomes binding for all the member states, so that it becomes binding mechanism all citizens can rely on. We have been talking a lot about the treaties. And well, I'm surrounded here by politicians. I think where there is a political will, there is also a way. If there is not, if we don't have a social dimension now, maybe there was not enough political will to bring it about. And the minimum wage, for example, what about that? Well, we have submitted a proposal in this respect. So something is going on, but you don't have a right enshrined in some treaty, and that is the problem. We have a gap between the legal basis on the functioning of the EU. And well, yeah, that's basically because of the political will, because the governments were not ready to bring the social into the treaty. Which has to do with the economic model many member states have, which has to do with the social security systems they have in the member states, which are historic products that grew over the years and decades. But I also say that if we have the political will, we can change things now. We have to express this will now and make the relevant proposals. So the member states, the national level, and the EU, they have different competences. Are we willing to give competences to other levels? What is my advantage as a German when I have minimum wage? When we had the German unity, there were many companies who moved their headquarters to Eastern Europe, to many countries which are now members of the European Union, or to East Asia. So minimum wage, this is something which has also repercussions on the economy of our countries. Well, I think in Europe and in all European EU member states, what we need is a fair competition. That's what we have to create. No social dumping. That is very, very important. And that's a progress we need. That's not the because we have certain things in Germany that we have them in all countries of the European Union, and that's what we have to bring about. That's true for minimum wage, that's true for telework. Telework in 2002 is something which the ETUC, together with the employers, organized in a convention. And that's an example for other member states. So positive signal from Europe to the member states, one could say, so that home office or telework can be regulated together with the social partners in order to make the right steps in this respect.
Weil wir gerade über nationale Ebene Europa gesprochen haben. Beim Thema Mindestlohn ist es ja so, dass gerade
in the topic of the minimum wage, I do think that the very advanced states, as Finland and Sweden, don't support that because they have very strong social partnerships in place. And they feel this might intervene into their national system. So is it always a question of the national states don't want it, but Europe wants it, or vice versa? I would like to find out more about that. Yes, indeed. The difficulty that we have is just that. There's a diversity at play in Europe, and of course we need to use this, the potential of this diversity. And we need to invest into the strength of the individual member states, and where they are strong, we should be happy that they have the strength and that they can develop that way. However, some other countries desperately need the minimum wage because they need to catch up, and perhaps their industrial relations are not quite as well developed or established as in Sweden or in Germany or in France. So you need a bit of an extra push. I really don't know how to phrase that in German, but you should take that extra effort. Mr. Vogt, you are a politician in Berlin. When I hear minimum wages in Europe, the unemployment reinsurance, then all of a sudden we're talking about transfers, and money must be available. And the social insurance in Germany is quite exemplary, and many envy us for the social insurance system, the social protection that we have. So what does that mean if we wanted to establish that at the European level? Would transfers become necessary? Well, first of all, let me return to the minimum wage. We've had that debate in Germany, and we shared the concern that this might have a negative impact on the economy. We had quite a number of precarious employment situations, people working in hairdressing, for example, or in catering and restaurants and hotels, and it didn't have a negative impact. However, looking at the macroeconomics, we normally certainly should look at the collective agreements, and if you have a bit of a lesser minimum wage in another country, then you'll all of a sudden have a stiff competition, because people will be coming to Berlin wanting to work there. And I think we need a fair competition on a level playing field. I think for social development, we desperately need a fair competition. And that would be positive for the Berliners themselves, because they wouldn't come under pressure with their wages. And the Polish worker would also benefit from the system, because he would receive a higher minimum wage, and he might reconsider leaving his country and looking for work in another country. The transfers, now that's a different thing, because if you have the wage pressure, which may be a negative pressure for the employment situation, it means that we have a bit of an unbalance in our economy. And this might be detrimental for the internal market, and on the political level, the centrifugal powers will come to play, because people will sit back and say, well, what is the European Union worth if I am worse off than I was before? So we need a solidarity amongst countries and fairness. And I think in the long term, Germany will also benefit on the macroeconomic level. And because we need the internal market, we export to other countries and want our products to be bought there. So what you start doing would then be we get a minimum wage in Germany as in Greece and in Italy, all the same? Nine. It would no. It would be attuned to the median wages, but the same criteria would apply in every country, and then you would come to a more to a fairer competition, really. But if you look at the economic model of Germany and the one of Berlin, then we're heavily based on exports So that means that all our products, goods, and services would have to be produced in a competitive fashion. And I'd be very interested in finding out what the Berliners think about it. What is an internal market to them? Is it just the competition? Is it just an economic dimension? Or do you want to look at other dimensions? What's the situation like for a Romanian or someone from Estonia to work in Berlin? Should they have the same access to work and to living in the society? So what and who do we want to be is a big question in the Conference on the Future of Europe. Ms. Schumann, why do you think it was so difficult to socialize the social question? Why is it so difficult on the political level to say we are much more than an economic union, we're also a social union? What do you think as a trade unionist, because you meet so many people? Well, I also share the opinion that we do have a social dimension, and we can see the treaties. The treaties are something like the basic law of our union, and there is something like the social policy, and the trade unions and the employers are co-legislators. And I think this must be underlined because the social dimension is already there. It just must be a living chapter of the treaties. It's one of our crucial tasks, I think, to fill it with life. It's not sufficient. We don't have health included, for example. We need much more stability in Europe. We also must be prepared for future crises, as the crisis that we've just been through. And that wasn't possible in the past to include health, for example. We also need to develop further the climate dimension in order to find the answers to that question. I'd like to return to the question of health because you just mentioned it, but let me briefly ask for the Slido details, because if the citizens and the listeners are interested in joining into the debate, please put your questions to us live. You can go to slido.com, hashtag 476907, or you'd simply scan the QR code and then automatically a window will pop up and you can enter your question. We will receive it and then we will also answer them. Okay, talking about the health, I think at the outset of the COVID pandemic, it became very clear that it took a long time for member states to come to terms with it and to agree amongst each other. And we know that from Germany, don't we? Because the Länder didn't agree on the way forward from the start. But why should it be unionized, the topic of health? Because we had difficulties in Germany to come to terms with the health issues. I don't think that we should unionize it or completely harmonize it, but we do have to become more resilient to health crises. We should also open up the health services because the hospitals obviously have to be adapted to the present and the future challenges. But I don't think we need a regulatory framework. We must become more efficient in the preventive measures. We already network, and we should remain in this networking mode. And I think we'll have to take stock of the situation of what we can learn from the pandemic. Perhaps we never did enough in the area of prevention. The answer that we found was simply closing borders, which caused other difficulties. And I think the other thing is the production of vaccinations, of vaccines, and the sharing of vaccinations. So looking at the structures, I think we need to look at the regulations that could create obstacles, like, for example, state aid rules. But I think that is something that can easily be solved. It doesn't really have to be solved at the European level completely. It's been said many times that wherever there's a political will, there's also a way. So what are the main stumbling stones on the political level? The parties that can't agree? Is it the trade unions and the employers? What are the difficult junctions in this whole picture? And in other areas, in trade, it's much easier. Well, I'm not so sure that it's much easier in trade, but it's one of the main interests, of course, looking at the economy of the individual member states. But I don't want to enter the subject of trade. It's a different subject altogether. I think there are many connections and interfaces, really, because the countries join up in the ministerial councils, for example, in order to agree on certain ways forward. The parliament, however, is a different body. We represent, on average, our societies from the individual countries. We are elected. We ran as candidates on the national level, and therefore we also pursue different interests. You may have the lawyers there, or you may have those defending the interests of big companies, and you also have the craftsmen. And I think it's a fascinating body because we all represent different walks of life, and it is our mandate to decide and agree on pieces of legislation and on draft agreements and treaties in the interest of the EU population on the whole. So that's a different perspective that we have than the Council. We very often say we need much more of a cooperation with the Council of Regions, for example, because it's only by interchanging with them we have a bit of a benchmark function. And talking about Slido and all these new communication means using hashtags, that's a very rapid development in the area of communication, but we still need to reconsider how does our everyday life function, and I think in that sense, we are quite close to the European Trade Union Confederation and also the International Trade Union Confederation, because we are not looking at trade agreements because of the trade or economic agreements because of the economy. No, we want an added value for the people. Let me mention digitalisation. It's very often mentioned together with climate change, and we also note that the social inclusion is not quite as perfect as we might want it to be. In Brussels, we also discuss a lot about the platform workers, all those delivery guys that bring food to you in the evenings. For example, when you order some food from a restaurant and they are self-employed. They don't have any social insurance. What does the trade union, the European Trade Union Confederation, think about that? Can we absorb digitalization socially? Well, we have to. We really have to absorb it, but we need to regulate it. That's something that we missed out on. And what we experience now is a market that developed on the basis of using data. And I think that's something that we simply didn't see. The mass of data, which is like the new gold value in the economy. And it's not so easy to manage that. And it's important for us to talk with the European Commission and be in touch with the European Parliament and the member states in order to access normal labor conditions for those digital workers, if you like. But that's not the case right now. But we cannot develop our future or employment and our society on rules and regulations dating from the last century. So we definitely have to give them an opportunity to negotiate collectively and to negotiate their own terms and conditions. But those who don't want it are the platform companies. Yes, digitalization, the conference on the future of Europe, it's all very complex, huge topics. We have the European Parliament, we have the Council with the 27 member states, and they mostly disagree amongst each others. And now we need a conference on the future of Europe because now the citizens are called upon to submit their ideas, their proposals for arranging things differently. And you already mentioned the citizen panels. But what would be a result of such a panel? How do you implement that in Berlin? You were saying at the outset this event is a contribution to the Charter process, and you commit yourself to the conference Charter. And perhaps we can also look at the first questions, but I'd like to know from the Permanent Secretary what the citizen panel would look like. Yes, we would like to help the citizens, of course, to develop their own ideas and projects in associations, for example, in fora that they create themselves. And we would like to encourage them to participate. Obviously, we also have the websites, and we do link up the information, the digital website of the European Union, for example. And of course, we also look at the different districts organize with, well, they organize the participation of citizens in such debates, and obviously you want to reach an objective with a meeting like that. And that's how we started. We have addressed letters to 320 citizens, and they'll be invited to join up to a common debate, and we will take 2 steps to include them in this participatory approach. We have an experience with that already from past years, and we also talked about it in the Committee of the Regions, wondering how the regional authorities could join in. From the Eurobarometer, we know that 80% of the population wants a fair and social Europe. Young people are particularly interested in climate protection. And in the Committee of the Regions, we said we shouldn't counterposition the representative democracy with the spontaneous democracy, and I think we'll move forward along those lines. I don't think that we'll be able to finish that process in spring 22. Yes, thanks very much. I'm sure that the European Trade Union Confederation also has started a process of collecting proposals. How do you bring all these strings together? How do you make sure that what we discuss here tonight, what others discuss, takes the form of recommendations and demands? Where must they be heard?
Well, they have to be heard in the plenary conference, in the plenary of the Conference on the Future, and in this plenary, there is a combination of participatory democracy and representative democracy. So you have the usual suspects there. 108 delegates from the national parliaments from the 27 member states, and 108 representatives from the European Parliament. And they're going to meet next year? No, they're going to meet in several rounds. We have met already, and I have to say it was a little bit disappointing because we're at the point where we cannot yet work. But next weekend we're going to meet in Strasbourg after the Parliament plenary. The others will meet us there in Strasbourg, and we're going to try to organize a work process on the different topics organized in the pillars according to the digital platform. So things which have already been voiced or discussed or presented in the citizens panels, that's what we are going to focus on. But in this plenary, from each citizen conference, there will be 20 representatives selected by each panel, which also participate in our conference, with which we want to make sure that there is interchange, functioning interchange between the various sides. Sounds good in theory, but we'll see how it works in practice. And I think I can concur with Mr. Wob. I also believe that it will be difficult to discuss all these issues in depth in the next few months. We cannot reinvent everything in so short a time. We probably need also a follow-up. And what I also noticed is that the experience of the last weekend was highly exciting. We had the European Youth event, which normally takes place every 2 years. Last year it couldn't take place because of Corona. And now, well, this youth event is something we organize as Parliament. And we have to brought it into the conference quite consciously. Over 5,000 youth from the 27 member states and the Eastern neighboring countries, or from the Balkans, or from the United Kingdoms. Young people participated, discussed with one another on how the future Europe should look like. It was fantastic. All these people were highly committed, but at the same time, we are aware of the fact that many young people who maybe doubt Europe, who maybe wonder why we are in such a confederation of states, are often not reached by us. So what the conference is doing, all these different steps, um, the results produced by the conference should be subject of a report we'll probably bring out in March. This report will then be presented to the Parliament and to the Commission. That at least is the idea of the Parliament, which is the driving engine of it. We'll then have a look at it and see whether we want a governance conference or rather a convention as described in the treaties. In any case, have a transparent mechanism which then concentrates these issues in a way understandable to everybody, so that people afterwards can see why the council said no to certain things, or the parliament, what their problems were. And this is something which is meant to encourage people to participate. Well, let's say, for example, the DGB and the ETUC, let's say, sits down at a table with the DGB and the member federations and tells them, well, these are the 10 points which according to us are the most important. Do you have a tool with which you can ensure that you get also feedback from the conference on the future on what has happened with your proposals? Well, provided we can participate, we receive the information, we receive feedback after we submitted our proposals that they have been accepted. Then there is a priority list on which we can look where our proposals can be found. And then at the sectoral level, at the national level, at the company level, we can further discuss these things and mobilize our members so that our members can also have a look at these topics, can understand them, can understand the process. Okay, it's obvious that we cannot have a result after a very short time. We need several steps and we need time to consider further steps. That is very important. And it's also important that we invite everybody to participate in these discussions. And I can see that many wonder whether this is a closed circle. No, not at all, not at all. The various citizens and the various societal groups should participate. We want them to participate so that we jointly build up this future of Europe, shape it so that it is not left in the hands of the lucky few here in Brussels. If I may, I'd like to take a question that has been posed by the audience. If as a citizens I want to be involved in this conference on the future, can I still do it? Or is the group already closed? This is a question on which Ms. Schömann has already spoken, and I'll give you the word in a minute. I'll give you the floor in a minute, but I'd like to ask the State Secretary Whoop first, because it is a very particular question for the citizens in Berlin. Could you say us if there is a Berliner who wants to participate, what does she have to do? Well, if a Berlin citizen listens to us here and via the streaming, she or he probably sits at the PC, has a browser, and you have then to find the page for the Senate administration for Berlin. And there you have the page on the conference on the future. And on that page, you can see how you can participate. All the possibilities to link up with a digital platform are described there. You can still make proposals. You can comment on proposals already submitted from various reports. We know that hundreds of proposals have already been submitted to the social objectives of the European Union. So you can consult all this. And I think Mr. Scholz mentioned this block, strong economy, social justice. You can link up there. And on our page, you also find information on events in the districts in which you can participate, where you can be involved in the discussions. And the information on those discussions will also be on the platform then. So it is really an open process. You can participate, you can be involved or make contributions. And you can also discuss in a cross-border way via futureeu.europa.eu, which I think is the page on the future of Europe of the Berlin Senate. And now you have the floor, Mr. Scholz. Well, yes, this means that people can participate because we have people can talk to people who don't speak their own language because we have interpretation for all the 24 languages. You can ask questions, you can answer other questions from others, you can describe what the situation, for example, in Berlin is. And sure, there are many differences also in an advanced industrial country like the Federal Republic of Germany. There are differences between East and West, and the question of solidary solutions, politically regulated, are interesting. And the whole thing is also an experiment, a new venture in a certain way. It's also learning by doing, I would say, and access to this platform is maybe not that easy to find it, than to go through the different theme blocks, social health, digitalization, and so on, the EU in the world, how are all these things interconnected, but then there are also events you can organize yourself. This possibility still exists. Things don't have to always take place here in Brussels or in Strasbourg. No, you can organize activities of yourself, of your own, because social Europe has to be Europe in solidarity. And what that comes about depends on us all, and we have to put pressure on those who will then politically decide these things. There is another question which has to do with the topic we've just been discussing, namely, will the ideas of the citizens also be discussed at the national or Berlin level? And I would say basically yes. But against the backdrop of what was said, namely that there is this report, I'd like to ask you, how do you make sure that the ideas that, for example, the Berliners put forth reach the European level, exactly as the ideas of the European Trade Union Confederation, and that they kind of are then taken up in the report? Who would like to speak on this? You're all silent. Yeah, okay, you're going to take the floor. Yes, I think, or something I'd like to add. Could you say in a very short and concise way how, as a citizen, you can follow all these discussions? How, if you're a normal citizen, can you participate? Well, the discussions taking place at the moment, this fora, the citizens fora, the plenary, all this is web streamed, i.e. you can listen to it live on the internet. Well, people will be disappointed because there are a lot of nice words uttered in this plenary, and then in the working groups, you will try to translate these beautiful words into concrete proposals. And I think in a democratic society, it is important that the participants in this conference are made politically responsible, so that, and how we then put pressure on the politicians at the Berlin level, at the national level, at the European level, will depend on how well we ourselves are organized, how well the citizens are organized. There are member states, there are members of parliaments who are afraid of the conference, who don't want to change the status quo. Because there are habits and people sometimes cling to their habits. But the question is, how can we improve things? And this youth event was therefore very, very important, because I think young people, I think 99% of young people said, we need change. We need an opening to the future if we want to solve the problem of climate change and the repercussions of COVID-19. And if we want to have peace in the world, for this, we need decision mechanisms that make it possible to reach decisions fast. And the participants in the conference, the citizens' assemblies, and the plenary, i.e. The members of the parliament, the committee of the regions, and the citizens together, they have to push for this being taken up in the report. Well, this is interesting, and this leads us over to the next question. What do you think can the influence of the citizens be if many of the decisions cannot be implemented as long as the member states do not agree? Talking about the council here, obviously, the parliament is one way to participate in a democracy. Now we have the conference on the future, and I'd like to give first the floor to Ms. Schömann. What do you think? How much will citizens be able to have some influence? Quite a lot, I think, but you have to make the effort and be courageous enough to participate. You should not be afraid. You shouldn't think it's too complicated. It is not too complicated. And you should not just say, well, they're not going to listen to me anyway. No, don't give up. Participate and try to use the different levels which are proposed. And there are quite a lot of them, as has been said. Also, we, the ETUC, have initiated such discussions, and we have taken up many of the ideas presented. And we look at these ideas and wonder what could be put into practice. And then we wonder also what we could, as a supplement, add to these ideas, what our organization could do, what we could do in the companies to which we have access, how we could bring these ideas into the discussions at those places. And therefore, it's very important that we, as trade unions, take up this opportunity, but also the other fora should use the possibilities they have to participate, to become active. And that is democracy, become active. So the parliamentarians in their electoral districts, for example, and well, if I may get back to this question, if things cannot be implemented because the member states do not agree, I think this also refers to the current situation, which is that among the 27 member states in the council, there is no agreement. What the citizens can do is to commit themselves at the national level and try to convince their national government. That is true, but with a conference on the future, we have now a body at the European level, which gives you another possibility to speak up. And that, I believe, is something which, well, is something unique, I think you can say. I think such a far-reaching process at such a level with such a complexity is something without precedent, right?
Yeah, that is entirely true. We've never had that before. It's absolutely new. But I can see yet another problem. Many of the citizens who speak up are a little more familiar with European policy. We don't really reach out enough to those citizens who feel that political engagement doesn't pay off. It's useless, they find, and they don't want to take up that opportunity. So the question arises, how can we enter into dialogue with them? How can we find out why they are frustrated, why they don't trust a dialogue any longer? And I think it's really exciting to look into the Conference on the Future of Europe because you can participate yourself, you can take the floor. And I have to say that I joined one of these citizens panels and I started talking to an 85-year-old lady from Baden-Württemberg and a young 18-year-old Austrian. And they both told me that they'd never really participated in a political discussion, but they really liked the idea of being approached directly and being invited to this dialogue. And then they sat down at the same table with someone from Finland, from Poland, from Portugal, and they started talking to each other. And I think that's a novelty idea. Well, perhaps it's also a good idea to start that same process at home around topics which are topical in Germany. Look at the conference on the future of Europe and the fact that the report should be submitted to the Council in the spring of next year. And now you can let your dreams run free and you can formulate two things that you would see very prominently in the report and hopefully being transposed or implemented. Well, I would wish that many more women would participate in this process. Unfortunately, we don't have enough women yet participating, and I would appeal to women to raise their voice. I would hope that the report demands an unemployment reinsurance, so that we move forward in that field and that we get majority voting for social legislation. Looking at all those regulations and legislative initiatives that are based on the social policy chapter, we very often encounter difficulties because of the unanimity rule in the Council, and they don't get passed. 1, 2, 3. Frau Schömann, Miss Schömann, what would you like to see realized? I would like to move forward in the area of digitalization and more particularly with a view to protecting the data of individuals and of workers. So all the data collected in employment should be very transparent, should be very safe and accessible for the people concerned. We also want a dismissal protection on the European level to offer something like a job guarantee, a better job protection at least. And we also need to move forward in the area of due diligence, which means that companies cannot simply transmit the liability to workers or so-called self-employed people, but that they acknowledge their responsibility for workers within and outside the European Union. That's a question of liability, really. It's very important for us in the area of social policy, but also in the environmental policy area. Mr. Scholz, what would you like to see written down in the report to the Council? Oh, I have a long list of wishes and will probably concentrate on the topics that we discussed here today. I would expect from the conference to vote for a social progress clause being enshrined in the treaty for the future. I think that really is a prerequisite for us to move forward in other areas like the minimum wage and things like that. And you reminded me of the supply chain legislation. It's really highly complicated, the economic reality nowadays. We need to settle that on the microeconomic and the macroeconomic level. We can't be talking about social Europe without talking about the responsibility of Europe for peace in the world and social standards in the world. So solutions that we find in Europe and want to implement it in Europe should also become part of the reality of other people beyond the borders of Europe. I think that would be a very strong contribution of Europe to social peace. Thank you very much. I think that we've almost covered everything in the social policy field, including representation of women, the unemployment reinsurance, digitalization, looking more properly speaking at the workers, the digital workforce, that they can be certain that their data are protected, that we look at the same rules applying to everyone down the supply chain, the question of responsibilities and the social progress clause to be adopted in the treaty. And I think those are the demands that you would probably, all of you, support. And they should be taken up in the report, and the social laws and social rights should be integrated in the primary law. Thank you very much for this very lively debate. I think I would like to add that you, the spectators, those who watched the debate, you should know that you can still participate in the ongoing process. In November and December, the Berlin Citizens Dialogue will take place. 120 citizens have been invited to discuss around the topics of just Europe, but there's also the website which you can approach and you can exchange with French, with Italian and so many other citizens around Europe. It's automatically translated and interpreted, and you find so many other contributions in the flash conferences. And there's something else that I found. Ms. Schumann quoted Jean Monnet. It doesn't matter whether you are a pessimist or an optimist. It really doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you are dedicated and determined in what you do. And with that, I would like to close this evening's session.